Hello, my friends. What's happening? We got a whole lot going on this week. Been working with Francesco, who helps out on these and works with me on the live stuff. He's going to get, he's helping get a bunch of the full episodes up on YouTube, clips going on the LiveWithMattRad IG. And Bradley, who's one of our participants here, is helping us with show notes. So we're going to have some show notes up. Let me get John on here. There's a lot happening this week. I'm trying to make this a resource for you guys. Let's go, Jon Castelli. How you guys all doing today? Everybody good? Hey.
And a resource it shall be.
A resource it shall be. Oh, I like the outfit today.
Oh, thanks.
What's going on, man? How are you?
I'm all right. I'm good. I'm a little bummed. I did a skim through. I did a meditation, and I did a quick skim through of the new Alicia Keys album because I wanted to. I don't know. I just wanted to give it a quick listen. Sonically, I didn't really listen to the records as much as songs. I noticed that Tony Maserati, for those of you who don't know, my mentor, only got to mix one, and he usually mixes most of the album. And it's so unfortunate when you listen to that one compared to the rest of the album, how thoughtful the vocal sounds and how well it's mixed. And then the rest of the album just sounds all mid-rangey and weird to me. So just coming in on a critical response to a massive album, Tony killed this one song that he mixed, and I got to call him after this to just ask him, like, what the fuck?
What happened? Yeah.
It's just a little disappointing to hear her sound that good on one song, and the rest of the album, it just sounds like all nasally and not airy and beautiful like we know her to sound, and it's weird.
Well, we've talked quite a bit, and there's actually, I think, a clip up on the Live with Mattrad, the IG, about continuity through projects, and there is something really disappointing about hearing. I haven't heard this album, but listening to albums where it's like the first three songs sound great, and then the fourth one you're just like, what's going on here?
Yeah, it's a shame because it's right in the middle of the album, and you get there and the vocals all airy, and Sampha is featured on it, and Sampha sounds great, and he's a producer on it. It just sounds it's to me at least objectively better than the rest of the project. There's one amazing song that Mark Ronson produced song-wise. It sounded great. Serban mixed it, and it sounds all right. It sounds like, to me, it's the second best, but just vocally speaking, the one that Tony did, she just sounds so fucking beautiful.
I was just say, do you know, is she, I know that a lot of, and it's funny, we just did this stream on Sunday with Matt Beckley, who I think was at least in the chat for a moment there, talking all about vocals, and he as a vocal producer really has his own setup dialed with a custom 251. He uses a Chandler and has his setup. I get the impression that most, especially divas, I guess if you call Alicia Keys a diva, just famous.
Yes, it is, Brandon, authors of Forever. Yeah.
Multi-decade successful female vocalists, probably male vocalists as well. They really have their own vocal chain dialed. I remember early on when pitching stuff for Kelly Clarkson after a few albums, she had like her vocal producer and her exact mic and the whole thing. I assume most people have that. I know.
And Mincielli's been with Alicia for over a decade. I don't know if the chain is always the same, and she's notorious for going to hotels and recording in random spaces, but the same engineers recording it. So the source material is going to be most likely similar to some degree. And just interesting how where Tony took it, and then where Serban and Manny took the other records, and Anne mixed a couple herself, which to me sound like the second best, having the engineer who recorded it mix it. Something about the way Tony scooped out some of the harshness and exposed the air in the top is quintessential Alicia to me, at least. Like, it's dark. She's always a little bit dark and mid-rangey. That's kind of her grit that we like from her, but there's enough air that it sounds beautiful. That's the tricky part, is I know that Anne records everything. She's credited as engineer on everything. I went down the whole list, everything. And I did quick skims through the records just before we got on here, because I listened to Tony's first, as he posted about it. was like, oh, this sounds amazing. And I just went through the rest and just, what a letdown. Just sonically. I haven't gotten into the song or the production at all. That's for another listen. But sonically speaking, I'm a little bit let down by everything but Tony.
Well, the
shout out to Tony Maserati. Love you, bro.
Shout out, Tony. The album that I'm excited to listen to, which I haven't gotten into yet because I've been so busy, is the Ava Max album, because I know that Circuit just went absolutely crazy on that.
I'm sure he did, yeah.
And I'm such a fan of his productions, and that'll be an interesting one. That like the most modern, super global pop.
Yeah.
I love. The thing about, we talk a lot about different kinds of records and different intentions with what people do. The thing that's always disappointing to me is when someone takes, and you and I have talked about this a lot. I don't want to get into like bashing different records and things, but
I think it's okay to critique. I think people need to critique a bit more. So I'm
just as a general thing, when people have the type of artist and the type of album and the type of productions that are meant to be, let's say, open and under compressed and those sort of things, and then they put all that very modern squishiness compression on it, that tends to ruin records for me. But if somebody's intention is to make the most in your face, aggressive, just like smash you in the club type of records, then it's appropriate, and then I just love it. I mean, actually, Circuit's a great example of that, because there's a few of those, like I Feel It Coming, and some of those things he did with Daft Punk for The Weeknd have a really great openness to them. And then some of the stuff where it's just like listening to a couple of the Ava Max records, they just sound so in your face, and it's so cool to me. I love,
he's one of the best.
Sound.
Such a fan as a human and as a producer writer. I'll listen to it too. Let's discuss it, because again, being such a fan, I don't necessarily crave that genre of pop, but I'll do it for this purpose.
Young female global dance pop, not your thing?
Not really my thing.
Yeah, it's everybody's
I know she's extremely sweet, and Henry's one of my favorite, but yeah.
I've only just sort of like DM'd with him a little bit, but I've been a fan for years and years. I don't know. We got a bunch of questions this week. One of the things that I actually wanted to talk to you about was maybe we can, and we'll get feedback from people on here as well. It seems like doing, and we won't do it today, but maybe in the future, doing like a whole hour on a specific topic seems both interesting for you and I, and interesting for other people, because it's nice to answer specific questions here and there.
I mean, the most views we've got and the most participation we got was the gain structure one, which I find really interesting, because it's such a lame topic to some degree, but just nobody knows anything about it, it seems. So, cool topic that I don't actually understand, but I've heard we should talk about. I do like the theory of doing that more regularly. The feedback I got in DMs from people and texts from friends was how fun we made gain structure. Like, it's just not a fun thing to talk about.
You guys, we're going to do gain staging.
So I'm with you on that. I do love here and there doing rapid fire, because you'll get our gut reactions. And if people can't tell, I'm overly enthusiastic most of the time. So I love to just jump in on things. And if I have nothing to say about it, I'll be like, yeah, it's a bad question. Let's move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is fun. But it's obviously your show, and I love that. I love when you steer. So please.
Well, so maybe today we can just kind of go through some questions, just chat about what we feel, and then I thought there were two good topics that get asked a lot. One is about mastering, and one is about low end, which I know that you and I could just talk about low end for days and days and days.
Sure.
So maybe we spend all of next week or the next couple of weeks picking specific topics like low end, mastering, a couple of those things.
Yeah.
I got a few questions this week about kind of like motivation psychology stuff, which I know you and I love talking about. Dashmere asked, what do y'all do when you don't feel like making music or dislike what you're making?
Great question.
Which I love that question, because I think the important thing to realize is we all feel it. Sometimes, a lot of the time, some of the best people I know don't like anything they do. I think the vast majority of things, especially as a producer and a writer,
I think mostly the stuff I make isn't very good. It's not to say I can't enjoy things that I do. And when I make something that's really great, or I'm involved with something, with a collaboration with a lot of other people, I get really excited and I go, man, this is so great. I'm so happy. And that's part of what keeps me going. I mean, it's kind of like comedians talk about it, especially most comedians, when they're first 5 or 10 years of their career, you're still bombing a lot of the time. And you get through the times when you're bombing, because when you kill, it's the greatest feeling in the world. And I feel like production's the same way, where it's like I'm like stressing and losing my mind. Everything sounds terrible. And then sometimes when it sounds amazing, I just go, this is the greatest feeling I've ever had. And how do you get through those times? And you as a mixer, but also as a producer and writer and other things, how do you think about when you're not feeling it, when you're not excited? Either you don't deal with a lot of things these days where you're mixing something you actively don't like. Although a couple of weeks ago we talked about it. You ended up mixing something and you were doing something. You're like, I should have said no to this, and we've talked about that. But when you're in it, especially when you're starting out, you're doing a lot of things you're not necessarily in love with all the time. How do
that example was they wound up using the rough mix on that one, so I should have said no. I thought the producer was happy with it, and we got it across the line, but that will exist on the, I think, slightly less than handful of records this year that they're going to use the rough. And I can say that the 3 or 4 of those that turned out to be the case have all been ones that I probably should have said no to and didn't really enjoy working on. Now, that being said, I can normally find something I like about the mix. Something that I remember listening to Manny speak about on, I think it was Pensado's Place, where he said, if I don't like the record, maybe I like the snare, and I focus in on that snare. I find a new inspiring sound that I like in that record that, I can rely on that at least giving me some auditory pleasure as I go down. So I'm on that school of things. Like you said, though, I'm at a position where I like most of the high majority of what I'm working on I can get into. When it's something I'm not enjoying, it's usually a difficulty at play, and not out of my comfort zone difficulty, like usually battling the loud rough we're talking about that's just so obnoxious and I just know they're not going to like it. That's the only time I get pure non-enjoyment, and I take breaks. I mean, I always talk about breaks. We've talked about in the earlier episodes.
Talked about it a lot. I
just go away. I'll put a podcast on. I'll go for a walk. I'll meditate. I'll do my workout later in the day. I'll do a second bike ride. There's so many other things to do to take quick perspective breaks to get through it. But really, I think that there's got to be a judgment call early on if you enjoy the piece of music that's presented to you to work on. I remember getting a guitar or piano and vocal songs, and I was a producer, as I'm sure you're well versed in. And I say yes because of an opportunity, but then I actually I've said yes, and now the session's in front of me, and I'm like, what do I actually do with this record? There's a million ways it can go. So here's my way, and maybe I do a halftime, but then like the double time dance version wins of the record, but I hear it more emotionally. Like, did I enjoy the time working on it? Sure. But did I enjoy the outcome of it because I feel let down because I didn't, the expectations of it going through, and you didn't know 2 other producers are working on it. And there's a lot of variability there. I think make a discerning judgment and conversation with the people before. And we talked about this last week where I disagreed with you about you saying yes to everything to a degree on the come up. And then I think you kind of sided with me to a degree after explaining it, because I think the closer we get to understanding what we're good at and where we're at, and of course we have to say yes to things for other reasons, but the closer we get to saying no earlier, the less of this we'll encounter. And again, still, 17, 18 years into this, the times I least enjoy it are when I know the gut said to say no earlier.
I think, you said something. I think I agree with you. You said something earlier about finding something in the process that you can enjoy, something to hold on to, something to anchor you.
Yeah.
It's something Eric Valentine talked about a lot when I was coming up with him, where, if you're producing a band and maybe it's not your favorite thing, but look, you got to work, you got to eat, you got to do your thing. You're producing a band.
Yeah.
Well, try to make the dopest guitar sounds you've ever heard. Try to make the greatest drum thing. Try to make the biggest chorus downbeat hit. You know, we're talking about rock bands at the time, but like, you know, if you're working on things that you don't love, it's a challenge. I mean, and this is something that you and I get into a lot, which is the thing that separates the really top level people from the tier or two below is very rarely, or a small percentage, pure skill. It really is about professionalism, being able to be consistent, being able to get things done. I guarantee that some of the hits that Serban has made, he's not sitting there being like, this is my jam on the 17th mix revision.
No.
But he does it, and he does it with a smile, and he's great to deal with. And, you know, I was telling somebody the other day, there was something I worked on with him years ago where, you know, mix revision 15, the note was turn the guitars up, you know, a dB and a half. And then mix revision 18 was turn the guitars down a dB and a half back to where they were.
Yeah, and that's hard. That's a hard one.
But that's part of the gig, and
part of the gig.
You got to be able to anchor yourself on something. And you know, in that situation, I think the answer is take breaks and make sure you're working on other things you love, and jump between things if you want. I mean, that's one of the ways that I and I think you do it a bit too. Where one of my favorite things to do is to be working on multiple productions at the same time, because if you get stuck in one sound and one palette and one place over and over, it makes it hard to break out of that. Even if I go do a push-up or walk around the block or meditate or have a snack or whatever, to be able to go between songs and try different things, even if I'm only getting paid on one project, it's still great to have other things to be able to bounce my brain off of.
That's a really good one. That's a really good one. That's every day for me. So I guess I forget that that's the best way to do it. Where actually I try my best to not let deadline decide what I work on and let inspiration decide what I work on, which I think we talked about a few weeks ago, or I've talked about a lot, which is sometimes some records are nighttime records for me and some are daytime or morning records for me. So I know at night I'm going to be in a certain type of mood, so I'm going to mix this maybe slower record or maybe a more a deeper record, a more moody record, something I can really dive into the 3D landscape of. And maybe the morning I'm going aggressive pop and a little bit more like up tempo, upbeat. And if I'm not feeling that, I always have the other one to jump on. But I let that dictate where I'm at. And I always jump back and forth. Sometimes it's actually more interesting to do notes before I bounce a mix. So I'll do a mix for something. I feel that vibe, and I'm like, cool, this is tight. But I got notes for 4 other songs to do real quick. So I'll spend an hour doing those notes and then come back to the song to take a break. So that's a really good point of having different production styles to work on, different artists in a mix process, different songs, different artists. We're kind of always doing that. It's really rare these days to be zoomed in on one project for extended amount of time, unless you're in like that lockdown songwriting world where you're just throwing colors at the canvas for 2 months in a house because it's got a COVID lockdown. And, you know, obviously that happens, but that's not really my world. So I do love that aspect of it. I don't think about that very much. That's why that wasn't my first reaction to your question or to the question, but that is the best way to do it for me. And I think that's just subconscious. I do that.
Matt, quick one there. Matt was asking in the chat, how do you deal with notes that you know are wrong?
I don't know they're wrong.
That's the answer right there.
Who knows what's right and wrong? So they try. Actually, you know what?
He may not have asked it exactly like that, but that is the correct.
That is.
Yeah, go.
That's a great question. Let's go for a story that I can't really discuss the names of the people at hand, but I'm going to just go in.
The names will be changed for the privacy of the. It's based on a true story.
This is great. This is like, this to me is the most inspiring it's funny. Most inspiring conversation I've had in over a year musically, and it was with a record executive. It was with the CEO of one of the major record companies, and I don't have many of these direct relationships. So this is going to be as candid as possible because I'm in a place where I deal a lot with, you know, VP A&R, young artist, new artist, up-and-coming producer. It's kind of where I exist at this point of my career. And then I got a couple of bigger projects here and there because someone wants to try me out. Yeah. But I had a call on Zoom on Friday with one of the CEOs of one of the companies that he's prioritizing this artist that I'm working on. I had no idea this was coming. And I had done 4 revisions of a mix. Producer was happy. We're sending it off to mastering. And then I get an email from the assistant or a text message from the assistant to this executive saying, hey, so-and-so would love to jump on a Zoom with you about this mix tomorrow. Do you have time at whatever, at 10 a.m.? I said, yes, let's get on the call. We get on the call. He's straight to business. There's no small talk in the beginning. It's just like, yo, you did a great job on this, but what you did to this mix was make it like a great vibe, a great fan record. But this artist has so many fan records. That's how we've developed him. But this is supposed to be his crossover pop radio jam. So I got some thoughts on how to take it there, right? 2 notes. He's like, I think we can get it in 2 notes. Drums down, vocal up. And I was my reaction, because I'm so enthusiastic with these things. I'm like, I would never do that. I don't even like that idea, So my thought in my head is bad note, as with this question. But this is like the head of this label who has from, hit after hit, success story for decades after decades. Yeah. He must know something, right? So I do those notes and I just we play the hook down and I hear him scream through the Zoom like, fuck, that's perfect. Like, this hook is crazy. It sounds crazy, whatever. And I'm thinking the same thing on my speakers. I'm like, this sounds insane. Like, it just got so tall and so wide because I brought the drums down. So he's like, well, the difference here is yours sounded like a hip hop record and it bumped and it hit really hard. But these drums, by default, hit hard. You already made them hit hard. When you turn that down, you open up the vocal, it just sounds like it sounded radio. It's, for lack of better terms, like it sounded big pop, like massive, and it's objective, like an objective success measure there for the potential of this record versus my perspective on the record was like cool hip hop record. And it blew my mind because my initial gut reaction, which I kind of expressed halfway to him, was, what? I would never turn the drums down. I want that kick to bump as hard as possible. Yeah. The kick does not bump in this record, but the vocal is soaring, and now the song comes out more, right? So I was inspired, like, kind of to understand, like, what vision someone can have with 2 notes. Yeah. 2 notes that are not my gut reaction to things, because I like drums hard and vocals in the mix whenever possible. I like them loud, obviously loud enough. I mix pop music, so the vocal has to be intelligible throughout. But this vocal is loud now, like loud. And I'm so into it. I bumped it in the car on the way to Ojai this weekend, and it just sounded huge. Like, so anyway, there's no wrong note, and no one. Now, in that same conversation, after we did those 2 notes, we did a couple more nuanced things, and there was a note that he asked me to do that I stopped halfway through the hook, and I was like, nah, it's not right. Let's go back. He's like, yeah, fully agree with you. Like, I was able to kind of push back on certain things, but that's because we've now gained trust, because I've done his note and he loves it. So now I can say, well, I don't agree with that one, right? Yeah, not because I want to disagree, because I truly don't agree with it. But we tried the note. I didn't say no to any note he brought up. I didn't resist it. Like, we have to mitigate resistance from the creative process. Now, if you're on version 50 of a song and you're talking about guitar levels, that's when I'm going to get a little irritated. Maybe 15, maybe 18, like I might get irritated, but that's my personal reaction to this thing. I have to meditate harder and longer and put myself out of that place, because who cares? Yeah. If you still want to hear the guitar down, something's not right. So let's get it right. But the song's got to come out, so there's got to be like a little ending to this.
Well, so there's, I mean, that's so cool. First of all, you got to tell me off the stream what song it is, because I'm so excited and I really want to hear it. And if it becomes a big hit, I hope we get to reference this. The song that I was referencing with the guitar up and guitar down was Best Song Ever, which sold 5 million or something.
Yeah,
so it turns out you got to, as a mixer, as any part of this process, like you got to do that kind of stuff.
I just don't want to be resistant.
Yes, that's exactly it. Is like your job, our job, most people watching this stream, our job is to facilitate a group of people trying to make something happen. And if someone gives a bad note, I'd say 9 times out of 10, maybe even 49 times out of 50, or, the bad note doesn't get kept. but you got to try things too, because sometimes the bad note is an unexpectedly great note. And you can't be resistant to trying things.
It could open the door to something else.
I've been wrong a lot. There's a lot of times when I've gotten a string of notes on a production or something else, and I go, I don't think this is, but then I go approach them, and then it turns out either they're right or I did something to achieve the same result and it's better, and I wouldn't have done it if they hadn't given me a note. And that's a really important part of the process, that you got to not be resistant. You got to be very Taoist with it. You got to, or judo, like you take it and you go, okay, well, I'm going to take it and I'm going to put it here. I'm going to take your note and adjust it this way. I think having ego around people giving you notes is insane, because
that's a good point.
That's literally your job.
You brought up a little thing that's actually pretty massive, which is interpreting notes and kind of Mr. Miyagi type shit. I kind of use this always because it's the most common note, which is like turn the vocal up. If the vocal needs to be up, something's in the way of the vocal.
Yes.
I rarely, besides the story I just mentioned, I know why he said vocal up. And to me, it's too loud, but it's very exciting and it drives the record versus I had the drums driving the record, right? Like hip hop, the drums usually drive the record and the vocals in. Pop, it's kind of, you got to find the right balance. But someone recently asked, yo, can you turn the vocal up? And I just energized the upper mids more, right? I just saturated in some more presence with like a warm tube kind of setting, just pushed it up a bit. I didn't turn the vocal up and it was approved, right? Like it's not always what is asked for. It's the comment is opening up dialogue about something that isn't feeling quite right yet. And then it is our job as engineers, producers, writers, whatever role to distill that down to whatever it actually is. Because sometimes there's 24 notes or 24 words or sentences or paragraphs that really mean one thing.
Yep.
That happens with really eccentric artists. Like all you needed to do was say you wanted the guitars down. But yeah. I love the picture.
I love that too.
I love it all. So but I know people that don't and vent to me about all these long emails that mean that, there's different types of personalities want super direct feedback or more visual type feedback and storytelling. I prefer the latter. I want you to open up the space for me. I don't want you to tell me to turn something up 0.5 dB. Whenever someone says this is accurate. When someone says turn something up 0.5, I normally turn it up a dB.
Yeah.
Like I don't really do what anybody ever says to do.
Yeah.
Very rarely. I love the notes of, hey, can you put this ad lib in a different space than the lead? Like, can you do this? Can you reference this for this kind of sound? Like those kind of notes are more interesting to me. And a vocal up means something's in the way of the vocal, unless maybe you're drinking a bottle of whiskey while you're mixing and you just like the vocal's way too loud. Maybe vocal down could have happened. Like there's always an exception to the rule.
As producers and mixers and engineers, our job is technical and it is sort of interpreting a creative psychological situation where you're constantly, even when somebody says turn up the vocal a half dB, you still have to go, how am I going to help them achieve their creative vision? It sounds sort of lofty to say it that way, but that's really what it is. If somebody says, I want the chorus to hit harder, can you turn up the vocal? What you should do is go, okay, that's one way to make the chorus sound more exciting, but what are some other ways? Because that's what I'm being hired for, because I have the skill set to go, maybe it's a saturation in the vocal. Maybe I need to duck some EQ in the guitars. Maybe I actually need to turn up the snare drum and the vocal. Maybe the kick drum on the downbeat with the vocal isn't hitting hard enough. It could be any number of those things. So being able to translate a note that doesn't make sense or might be a bad note or might be a great note, but you might find a better version of it. That's what you're being hired to do. And that's really your job as a creative person.
I mean, man, that makes me think of a specific example. I started doing it around Khalid album. I don't know how it came to my mind to try this, but I do it pretty regularly now where I even automate on different syllables instead of writing the fader. I'm not really a fader writer. I'll draw in automation, obviously, but I have faders, and I was actually asked yesterday why they haven't been on in a year. I just don't really use the thing. But I'll automate saturation on words and on syllables instead of gain. Like I'll do clip gain, but I'll also just like, if a chorus needs to come up, I automate presence. I could be on certain words. Like what if you want to have a reverb throw on a certain word? What if you saturate that one syllable like into the verb and it pushes and it becomes dense and then the verb gets distorted? Like we have so much technology to interpret things in ways unimaginable than well, let's turn the vocal up. Like sometimes that's the right move. Sometimes it's the right thing to compress. Like that is sometimes. Again, it's a challenge to just think laterally. Like just think something way different, another way. And I find that to inspire me as I'm working and coming up with new ideas.
A lot of vocal up notes that I've gotten as I do this more, I almost never just turn up the vocal. I can't remember the last time I did that. It's automation or EQ is the closest I get to actually like, can you just turn up the vocal? If the vocal's not loud enough, I just go, okay, I got to listen to it from the ears of where's the vocal not popping through? Why is it not popping through?
What are the guitar voicings? What are the chord voicings? Are they too upper mid-rangey in the sound, or is it like voice too high? So like the fifth is competing with the melody of the vocal, and like you got to lower the, there's musical ways, there's sonic ways to get out of the way. And, obviously when you're in the production and that's where I'd wish we could think about that more regularly, which is what you're doing. Like what's getting in the way musically. At my point, it's a little harder, but I have just like pitched synths down an octave with Little Altar Boy or just in the box or gone to Ableton and take the stem and pitch it down. And like, I think this is cooler, and then sent it back. It's rare, but I've done it before. I think just thinking of other ways to interpret. One, it's our job. Two, it's more fun than like doing the what's asked all the time, literally. Like I don't know. And sometimes sometimes it is the case. Sometimes you turn the vocal up and you're like, oh, okay.
Well, like you did with the executive the other day.
Can I give an antithesis story? That's a success story, and I'm going to give an epic fail story. To kind of counterbalance, which is just my life this weekend. There was like a real plus and then a real minus, and it's probably worth discussing. The
minuses are really important to discuss because people. I never
hear the minuses.
Yeah. Let's talk about it. Go.
So, producer duo that I work with a lot hired me to mix a song. And sorry, I just saw that from Brandon. That's really funny. I've never been asked to turn that much up or down, I don't think. So producer duo I work with a lot, mix most of the stuff that they put out. Worked on an artist that I'm very excited about. I like her a lot. I really wanted this project. But there's an executive producer at play who solely works with Serban. And really wanted to use Serban, but the homies wanted to give me a shot at this mix because we've been working together a lot. And I did a few passes, and we got it to a place where the three of us liked it, and then sent it to the executive producer, and he was like, man, honestly, like, yeah, this is a cool direction on this, but not how I heard it. I still really feel like Serban should do it. So, but like, if you want to take one more stab at a bit more of a more focused, dry mix on it, I went a little bit more like romantic and ambient and like kind of more spacious, dynamic, three-dimensional. But I understood why he came back saying that. So I did my approach at that. And again, he was like, all right, this is a lot closer, but I'm still hearing Serban. So like, we're going to send it to Serban anyway. I'm like, that's totally cool. Like the communication was so, direct with me that like nothing hurt any of my feelings. Like this happened. Sometimes you're just not the right fit for the gig. But then, because they're the homies, like they sent me or showed me Serban's mix, and I was like, it's pretty good. I understand why you'd want that. And then I gave one more attempt, and after hearing that, just because, and it still didn't work out, right? But I kept giving these attempts, mostly just because I wanted to prove to myself that I could do something that really isn't my style, right?
That's really important. That's a really important thing to do for all of us. And
the point, though, is going back to something that we talk about endlessly and tirelessly on this podcast here, which is Serban always going to be better Serban than I'm going to be. Like, I should have maybe backed out just because, like, you know, it took me more time. I was happy to do it because I'm like enthralled by the artist. Like, I really wish that it worked out that way. But hearing what he did, like, his still was a better version of that than mine. And mine was close because, like, I know how to mix like that. I know how to mix dense pop, congested, kind of like up against the glass. I practiced that way. I used to want to mix that way. So I understand the methodology of what it takes to do that. I know some tricks and tools to do that. But he's always going to be better at it than I am. So I had to learn. So I had one like super up and exciting, and one was like, it was kind of a letdown, but also a new place in my career and my life and my personality of like, it's not that big of a deal. Good for him. I'm glad he got it. Like, there wasn't any letdown, depression feeling when the homies let me know it wasn't going to work out. I was like, all good. Thanks for giving me the opportunity, you know, like, and I genuinely meant it. Right. And that's something that I would not have felt 6 months to a year ago. I would have either been like depressed for a week because of it. I would have been like, Serban. Like, just kind of more like angry of why does he always get the things? And like, I honestly, like, if you were to hear this, I don't love it. I don't love it, but I know what it is that they like about it. I still want to shift people to more like the potential of more dynamic range to certain genres of music that I think would still have a level of success that it would side by side with that version of a mix. But it's a losing battle when someone has in their head what they're looking for and who they should go to that person. So kind of a lesson for everyone that listens. If that is to happen, don't take it personally, right? Like, it has nothing to do with they don't like what I do. I mean, I've mixed 20 songs probably for them and have another one coming next week for the same. It's like, it can't be personal. Just as the other story of like, I like how you made the drums hit, but I want them to not hit as hard. That's not personal. That's not even anything. There's nothing about that is more than what it is simply in that moment, which is we need the vocal to be louder so I can hear the song better. And the drums don't need to knock as hard because they're still knocking hard. Like, just that simple. And there's nothing personal involved with either of these success to failure stories. Because I wouldn't even pick one as a success and one as a failure.
It's just
one
the process.
Worked out, just the process. Anyway, that's like the antithesis story. And it's kind of the fact that it happened on the same day or two, to me, is like, that's the story of what my life is going to be. Like, it's never going to change. 30 years from now, I'm still going to be mixing records, probably. Maybe that's like the end of the career, depending on how the ears are upkept. But someone's going to like what I do and another person's not. Like, how can that ever change?
Well, we talk a lot about a very important thing for people coming up and developing their thing is to really figure out as you try a lot of things when you're starting out, you sound like a lot of different people, you do a lot of impressions of other producers, of other mixers, whatever. As you start to figure out what it is that you really like and where you really sit that distinguishes you from other people, it doesn't mean that you just do that forever. You still, I think it's a good idea to do exactly what you did in both of these scenarios, which is do some things you wouldn't otherwise do as part of the collaboration and see what happens. And sometimes it works out great and the CEO of the company screams and goes, this is the shit. And other times you do 4 different mixes because you love the artist and you want to challenge yourself and it doesn't work out and you don't get the mix, but you pushed yourself and learned new things in both scenarios. So they're both wins. I think it's a really important lesson for people.
Yeah, I think so too. That's why I wanted to bring it up.
I think it's great.
Let's hit another question.
Let's see. Oh, somebody asked, I like this one. Somebody actually asked one on chat here. Jan asked, did people like your family believe in you or did they tell you to find a real job? I mean, there's a lot of ways to think about that question, answer that question. I don't know if I was saying this to you or saying this to somebody. I think that most of my friends that aren't directly in music don't really know what I do still.
Yeah,
I'm 36 and I recorded my band in my friend's garage when I was 11. So, 25 years in, I think my parents have a decent idea of what's going on, but like what I do day to day periodically people that I know super well will be like, so what exactly do you do every, like, what,
happens to me all the time.
So I think it's dealing with, I mean, the idea of being like 19 and your parents being like, what are you doing? Get a real job. That's a tough one. I mean, I think almost all the people that do what we do, I said this before, almost all the people that do what we do have made the unreasonable decision and to continue to do it at many, many points in their life, because there's almost always a better, easier, more reliable, more responsible path to take than to try to be a record maker of pretty much any kind. And the people that get through that first 5 or 10 years of really not making much money, most people being like, what do you do? Why are you at the studio for 14 hours for 6 days a week? Because you have to wrap in cables and you're 25. Like, that's a real thing. And I think most people make the responsible decision to stop doing this sort of stuff at some point. And I don't recommend either way for anybody. I just wanted to keep doing this shit. And I had a point, I think actually when I was about 25, where I had 4 potential gigs that I was going to take. All of them fell through. I had just traveled abroad for a project. It was actually the Hives thing that I was talking about on the stream with Matt on Sunday, where I went and worked on the Hives for like 2 weeks in Sweden. It was amazing. But I had to move apartments right before then. So I just got a new apartment and it was like $1,100 a month, which was more expensive than I could really afford. But I had these 4 gigs coming up. And right when I came back, all 4 gigs fell through. And so all of a sudden I had no money. I had an expensive apartment. And I remember thinking, like, is this the point when I quit? Is this the point when I try to go back to school? I remember going up to Oakland and talking to my mom about it. And I had the option because I had withdrawn from the UC system, but they let you come back even though I hadn't been there for 5 years. And I realized, like, if I quit this thing, like, I'm just going to regret it the rest of my life. This is what I have to do this. I have to do it. And maybe I'd done it too much then. Maybe it was something in me. Maybe I had more support than most people get. I mean, my parents were definitely weird about it when I initially was like, I'm going to go make records and I'm going to drop out of school. But even just having that amount of support system is amazing. There's no good answer for anybody, but the various points when I've been confronted with people being like, what are you doing? Don't you think you should do something? I just go, I have to do this thing. And if I don't make money and if I have to 10 bar and do other things for years, like, that's okay with me because I fucking love making music so much. And I can't give advice to other people about that, but I can tell you that the people that are successful have all gone through phases where it did not make sense what they were doing.
Yeah, I never know if it ever makes sense. I have a different story. Yeah, cool. That's probably worth sharing. I think that's. Yeah, please. I think it's pretty normal to have gone through what you're discussing, and most people will have gone through that. And I have parallels with that, but I'm pretty lucky. I was fully supported so much that my parents built me a recording studio. They resisted me dropping out of school that was going to give me a real job. I was studying music education. I wanted to be like a orchestra director and music education teacher, like something like that, which is a teacher. So my mom was like, oh, he's going to be a teacher. It's a real job. Yeah. And then I convinced them to let me drop out. My dad was a little more supportive in the beginning, and we kind of convinced her to let it happen. But this is at 17, right? This is 17. And I was built a studio by the time I was 18 or 19. That's a long story. And that's like something I don't share with everybody. And I would publicly talk about a fair amount of it. But it wasn't until I was 27, 10 years later, after already being in LA for 4 or 5 years, working under Tony Maserati, that I worked next to him side by side on a song that was on the radio, that my mom was like, oh, it makes sense why you dropped out of school and whatever. A decade later, and based on success of a song that I don't even really like. That's not what I was most happy doing, but it was the one that she got to hear and then tell her friends at work that her son had worked on. So it was like some sort of justification for me leaving home, however many years prior. And now she's a proud mom, and dad is, whatever. There's just so much for them to now point to that, or not so much. That's a pretty arrogant thing to say, but there's a fair amount of things that she can point to and go, oh, Jonathan did that. I could hear that when I go to Whole Foods, or it comes on the radio. And she's like, oh, Jonathan, I heard that song you did. Like, it wasn't until that they truly believed. And there was a lot of resistance when I was trying to move to LA from New York, first of all, having to close the studio that they built for me, with me, that my dad and I built with our bare hands, from scratch, 3 rooms. And it was incredible. It really was. It was just in the wrong place. Sadly, it was Long Island, New York. It's not the place for it. And again, this is like a 3-hour story that I could go into. But that moment that a Lady Gaga song was on the radio that I did with Tony side by side the whole way through, that made her a believer. So I think like there's something in that story that when I tell younger people that they understand, because they haven't had that thing that their mom or dad can point to and say, right, like that's why I'm here. And sometimes that never happens because they're working on underground shit that their parents don't even understand. That's another part of the conversation. Most of the stuff that I listen to, my mom's not going to like. I don't give a shit if she doesn't like it or not. The things that she gets to hear, most of the things that I probably like least. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of my version of it. That it's,
Yeah, I think I will say one thing, and then there's a question in the chat I want to get to also, that to do something that is outside of the mainstream, something in a creative world or an entrepreneurial world, and increasingly there's more and more opportunities for this. I mean, the idea of being like a YouTube person just didn't exist for anybody's parents anywhere. So you do have to have a certain amount of fortitude to just continue to do the things that you want to do, despite the fact not just people might be negative about it or say you're doing something dumb, but they just don't understand it. There's just it's hard to. I mean,
I was never told I was being dumb or I was wrong to do this. It was always confused responses of, what do you do again? Like, I swear, I mean, I don't think my girlfriend knows what I actually do. Yeah. And she comes to my studio because it's in my home all the time. Like, I don't know that people need to know what I do to make me feel justified for doing what I do. Yeah. I think that there's a bit more to point to as a songwriter or a producer. People hear that word, an engineer. Like, I'm not building compressors. I'm not building TV sets. I'm not building trains or driving a train. Like, I'm not doing that, but I'm a mix engineer. Oh, wait, do you decide the balances of the record? Sometimes, not every time. Do you add reverb to the vocal? Because some people know what reverb is. Sometimes it's already there. It's like,
some people know what reverb is. Almost nobody knows what reverb is.
But like, the point is, like, the answer is always sometimes to everything. I don't do everything every time. Yeah. So there's not one thing I can point to and say, that's what I do to a record. I think people that know me well could probably assert an aesthetic and play. Wait, your girlfriend. There she is. Great. No, I'm not a chef. I think my Instagram says I'm a chef, though.
You're a chef. That's what we say on all the podcast descriptions, that you're an excellent chef.
But I don't think that matters, and I don't think it should matter to how you feel that your parents don't understand what you do. I think you have to find a story to tell them that makes them happy for you, that you're pursuing your dreams and you won't let them down. If you care about not letting them down, of course. I cared. I didn't want to let them down. I lost sleep over these confused reactions to being out here for 4 years and having nothing to show for it, because I was just fucking around in a room with speakers on things that no one ever heard until something hurt,
Well, it's part of the reason we do this is so people realize that there's other people out there who have some kind of understanding of what they're doing. It's why I love talking to you and love talking to my friends about making records. And that's why we're doing it on live and putting it up. Yeah. Not because we want to give you the 5 tips to make your whatever. There
aren't, not there.
But because there's a group of us that, and it's a large group, there's thousands and thousands of us, but to tend to run into them all the time if you don't live in LA or London or making records all the time. There's a lot of us that do this thing that a lot of other people don't really understand. When people ask me what I do, I say I'm a record producer and songwriter. And I just say that because I know those are the words that people will go, I can at least pretend like I kind of know what that means. But then when they drill down, I go, well, I managed a band and I used to book shows and I played in bands and I sometimes make beats, but also just write lyrics sometimes. And sometimes I get hired to just give vision and hire the right people. And sometimes I'm a consultant and sometimes I sing background vocal. So getting in there is just, it's a hard, it's a hard thing to explain to people. And but it's an important thing to at least try to be able to do.
Yeah.
The question that was here earlier, how did you meet your mentors? I can just say real quick, the way that I met Eric Valentine was through records that I'd made. I produced a number of things when I was in high school, bands, including this band, The Matches, that ended up signing to Epitaph Records. And but we made a record basically in my parents' basement and the drummer's living room that Eric found through local California punk rock bands, and he liked the band and met with them, and they took me to their meetings. So I got to meet him that way, and basically just bothered him for 6 months until he hired me at $7 an hour to come assist on a record, assist on a project. So it was, I had made a bunch of things, and the results of me making good work was that it got passed around, and I got pulled into conversations and meetings because of that. If you have a quick Tony story, how did you meet Tony?
Mine's pretty similar to a degree. I was working with my best friend Addison from Long Island on what was the closest thing to pop music that I had been working on. I was mostly like working on indie bands from Brooklyn and Long Island and hardcore bands and more band focused stuff. And Addison and I were making pop. He met a manager through a homie, Evan, that used to assist Tony Maserati. Happened to be Tony's manager at the time, no longer managing him now. But after being introduced to her, when I moved to LA, she said, well, I'll fly out to LA and I'll introduce you to Tony because, you're an engineer. You should probably meet Tony Maserati. And I was like, probably should. Yeah, because he's my favorite. I've been studying him since I was 16, 17 and realized this is what I wanted to do. And More Money, More Problems and Biggie Records and, all the things, all the way up to Jason Mraz and some obscure French jazz records that he was making. We met with Addison and we were playing our records that we did together. And he thought that they sounded pretty good. So he was like, we should work together sometime. We never did. I think it was like 3 to 6 months later. At the same time, I've met one of my best homies now, Spider, who I talk about a lot, works with PMC that And Spider, we exchanged numbers. He texted me out the blue one day being like, yo, Tony and I were just thinking about you. Want you to come through, pull up. And just so happened that his studio was across the Burbank bike path from where I was. So I got there in 3-minute walk, just kind of walked across the street. Didn't even realize how close I was to his studio.
You probably walked quickly though.
Yeah, I did. I was so excited. And get there. That day, the story is longer than this, but because we don't have much time, basically that day he got a call from every call now that I know Tony is important, but at the time I was like, this must be a really important phone call. And he gets off the phone and he's like, yo, what are you doing next week? I was like, man, I'm so busy. I had no work. I was crying myself to sleep every night, had no fucking work. What are you doing next week? He's like, well, that was Lady Gaga's manager. And she's got 2 songs for me. Maybe we'll do them together. See what you got, basically. And we wound up doing those 2 together, and then she gave him 6 more records to do. And he's like, oh, you should move in across the hall. This room's open over here. We should do this more together. So that's the long story short. There was a little bit in between, but he just gave me a shot. And in that day on that record that did really well, that the one that my mom heard and was like, oh, it makes sense now. The way that I think he recognized that I had something was I just did something that he wouldn't have done. I overdrove the retro stay level that he had, that he just got. I think it was that day, same day it showed up. His assistant Justin was putting in the racks, and I we were so pissed off at how shitty the vocal was recorded. It was on a tour bus and it was all distorted. There was nothing above 5K. And I just turned that input knob up and distorted the stay level. And he came back from a cigarette smoke and was like, huh. And then just kind of like understood what I did. And he took it from there and he went off with it and did his thing. And then like would trade seats with me and be like, you fuck around with the, maybe make the drums, you know, like we would just throw it back and forth for a minute. And I think he was just giving me a shot. And her giving, you know, her asking us to do 6 more in less than a week was like, well, I can't do that much work. So like I need help. And so that's kind of how I met him. And then I moved in across the hall and I was there for 5 years after that project.
There's a great quote that many people have said. I don't know what the origin is, but I heard it from a baseball coach when I was like 15, which is luck is the point at which preparation and opportunity meet.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of people are
lucky.
People are looking for opportunities, but not focusing on the preparation. And the truth is, if you do really good work and you keep doing good work and you keep pushing yourself to get better, the world is full of opportunities that you won't see until you're prepared for them. And it's not some woo-woo shit. It's really like if you do great work, people will just share it. If you're great to work with and you do great work, people will find you. And certainly the hustle is important and DMing people is important and trying to get your stuff out there. But, you know, I made a record that people liked and that's how I met everybody. And you were doing good work and that's how you met everybody. And then
I took a risk in the room.
Took a risk.
That was the key. I think that he'd probably agree. I don't know. We've never really talked about that moment. Yeah. I don't think we have unless we were drunk or something and it came up. But he'll say that he recognized something. He recognized something different that he hadn't seen, and that's why he invested in me. And I think it was because, and like I'm not the guy that talks out of turn, but I'm also like I'd be on the couch and he'd be taking a break and I'd be like, yo, what about if we did this to that thing? And he would say, how about you do it? You know, no resistance. He wouldn't say, nah, bad idea. He'd be like, you do it. Like, oh, you want to hear a wild delay on that background vocal? You do it. And like I did some crazy shit when Echo Boy just came out and he was like, yeah, more of that. Like he hadn't even touched that plugin yet. You know, this is before Instagram. This is like, I don't even think FabFilter had plugins out. This is like Waves and Sound Toys, you know, and McDSP and the stuff that he was using. And like, I had gotten Sound Toys and I was fucking around with it. So I knew how to do things that he didn't have access to yet or whatever. And it's luck, but it's also preparedness. And you're also
providing value for him too. You're providing lots of value.
Yeah, he provided incomparable amounts of value for me. Like,
for sure,
I'm so lucky. I mean, I'm about to call him after this to talk about the Alicia album because, like, I know what he does to things when he has full reign on what it can sound like. And that one record out of however many is on that album, it just sounds undeniably better than the rest. And he is the best. And he's not the best because he's that talented. He's the best because he listens, that he tries new things, keeps young people around him that have good ideas. And he's just the most open. And, you know, I can't say enough about that dude, as you can clearly tell.
Shout out Tony Maserati. Okay, well, we got, about a minute and a half left. Let's call it soon. But I want to... for everybody that's watching and watches this, my thoughts for doing full hours on specific topics include mastering and low end. And with low end, there's lots to talk about. We've talked a bit about kick and phase, and low end is such a big, important part of your process and mine, and probably lots of people. I've gotten a few questions about low end again this week, which I'll hit some people back in the DMs. But if you guys have more thoughts on specific long form topics, we could even do another one on saturation and things like whatever you guys
hit me during the week, obviously, on it, and we'll pick one. And I think that's good. We can maybe trade off like random question ones and philosophical conversation to like, here's a topic, let's go on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you guys haven't checked out Live with Matt Rad, the Instagram, we got clips on there, and the YouTube Live with Matt Rad. We're getting tons of the episodes. We're a little backlogged because I was moving, but we're going to basically get another 5 or 10 up this week. So full episodes will be up there. Share with your friends, anybody you think would enjoy this. We're just trying to provide value for you guys. So whatever we can do, appreciate you guys reaching out. Thank you, John. Love you very much.
Love you too.
Peace, guys.
Peace.